Hey there 2D10 cult fanatics, my name's Namfoodle, and today we're talking about 3D6 were-rats. Hey guys, Mark here. Today we're talking about random tables. And this is something that I didn't think I enjoyed when I started D&D, and I've really come around on. And I want to talk about how I use random tables and some fun ways that you might be able to use them. So let's get into it. So why use random tables? Why use them at all? Why not just make up stuff that is going to be better and more creative? Well, there are reasons, and we're going to talk about them. The first is improvisational. So sometimes there's actually more cool stuff that comes out of something that you're not expecting than things that you plan out in advance. This, if you're running the game, can really help so that you're not railroading, so that you do have some weird elements that maybe don't quite make sense with your setting or your campaign, but it's so random. Random tables. It's so random that it doesn't really matter, because you have some encounter and then it's over and then you're back to your regular quest. So I think that's cool. And very much related to that, it's to surprise yourself. It's to surprise the PCs. It's to surprise everyone at the table. I told in my video on trinkets earlier in the year, I talked about a couple stories of the random trinket table that I have and how I rolled on those a couple times and just really random. Again, that word keeps coming up. Not sure why. Maybe it's because we're talking about random tables. But really weird things came up in these situations where they definitely didn't make sense. But it actually became really cool because then either one, do you just laugh about it and forget about it? Or do you work it into the game? So in the one case, a bride gave my PC a sponge as a gift for helping them. And it made no sense because this sponge was supposedly a family heirloom. It was really important to her and her family and had gone back generations. It made no sense. And I didn't know what it was, and the players didn't know what it was, and we sort of figured it out together at the table. Or rather, they figured out some of it, and I know the rest of it. And I don't think they ever found out the full backstory of that sponge, but I sure as heck created a full backstory for that stupid sponge. So the surprising elements, when it forces you to work something into the world that you aren't expecting, that can be cooler than you expect. And lastly, it's to flesh out your world. And if all you have is like your set pieces and your plot points and the NPCs that you've planned out beforehand and your plot hooks, it might be a very well-contained universe and a very well-contained adventure. But a lot of times, those sorts of adventures can feel very austere. They can feel very barren because there might not be anything random going on. Life itself is random. A lot of things happen that we're not planning for or that we're not expecting. And so this actually makes it feel more real, even if the random stuff we roll is really strange. That actually, in some ways, I think is more true to life than if we have a very linear, rational progression between events. So in terms of fleshing out your world, I think it's great. Whether it's monsters, whether it's magic items, whether it's trinkets, whether it's a lot of the others that we're going to talk about today. So all really cool, just really fun stuff. And I like the randomness. I lean into it now rather than away from it. When I first started, I didn't. I was all preparation. That's all I was. I was just a big ball of preparation. And random tables are the opposite. They are anti-preparation. They are, let me just see what happens. And again, how many times have you done something like that in life where you're just like, well, you know what? Screw it. Let's see what happens. And you might not have a D20 in your hand, but it feels like you're rolling a die. So I like that feeling. We play D&D because we roll that D20 and we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if we're going to hit the enemy. We don't know if we're going to make the saving throw. We don't know if we're going to make the death save. And we don't know what's going to come up on that chart. And that's friggin' awesome. So what random tables can you have? Like, what's good to have ready at any given point? And there are a lot of them out there. I don't use all of them and probably won't use some types, but I think a lot are good. And of course, there are tons of random monster encounters and monster tables. There are tons of random loot tables and random trinket tables. We talked about those already. You could find those in Wizards books. You can find other supplements to download or purchase on DM's Guild. You could probably make your own. And I think any of these or a combination of them is great. I think at some point everybody should use random tables for all of these things. Chase tables are another really good one. We will do a video on like races and chases at a later time of how to do this well, because I think a lot of people just look at the chase tables, and I certainly did at first, and I said, how in the world is this? How does it make sense? What do? Do you just roll and then say the thing that happens and that's it? It seemed really strange to me. That was one of the ones that was not as intuitive, and I actually wish that there was more direction on using chase tables. But I think they can be cool. I think they can add a lot of interesting things to a chase, whether you're being chased or doing the chasing. And there are other situations like races that we'll talk about in that video too. I don't know when it's going to come out. I haven't recorded it yet or even outlined it, but it will happen at some point. And so that's definitely one that you can use. So rather than just say, oh, you catch up to him or he gets away, that can be a really fun little sequence there where you're racing after someone. We've also talked about random tables in a few of the videos in regards to events. And these can be baked into your encounter tables along with, say, monsters and the actual combat encounters. And I think that's actually kind of cool. And a lot of times when I build out random tables, it's not just monsters. It might be actually a very small percentage of actual combats, and the others are events that could happen. And what types of events? Well, is it weather events? Is it environmental events? Is it random things with NPCs that aren't going to be a big part of the plot, that just bump into the players and something happens to them? Is it something that they find and maybe have to do it? Do they find a note? What does the note say? Where does that lead them? Is it one scene or one session's worth of play? Things like that. The other way that I've really enjoyed using events, sometimes I roll randomly for these, sometimes I don't, sometimes I pick my spots and then actually throw it in deliberately into a session, are events that are race-based or class-based. So for example, if you have a wizard, one of the more fun ones that I found one time, it was on some table, I think I got it from the DM's Guild, and say you have a wizard who's very bookish, they like to read. So they're reading through a book and they see a note written on the page and it says, go to this page to find something amazing. Well, of course, they're going to flip to that page. And this might be the end of the line, but you could also point them to a different page or a different book. And now they're on this hunt through this library and different books and different pages. And at the end of this chain, there was a very lewd drawing that they found, and that was it. There was nothing more to it. So they went on this like 5-minute long sequence of chasing, I haven't actually run this at the table, but I have it in my head. This is canon somewhere in my brain, where there was a wizard running around a library looking for some important piece of knowledge left to him by a past generation, and it's like a naked woman. So that's not going to work for your barbarian, but it might absolutely work for your bard or your wizard or something like that. And you can see how you could start to create certain things. So is your bard performing? Does another bard come up and challenge them to a musical duel? How fun could that be? It might not go anywhere plot-wise, but you have this fun little scene where you describe what you play and what the other person plays and how they do, and the crowd surrounding you, and it becomes this like dance off, or not dance off, although I don't know, you can have bards that dance. You could probably have a dance off. That would be wicked cool. If I have a bard that dances at any point, my players, if you're listening and you have a dancing bard, we're going to have a dance off in our campaign. This is happening. So what if they're just playing and then poof, on their shoulder, a devil, like a little imp type devil, poofs into existence and says, I'll bet a fiddle of gold against your soul that I can play better than you. Like, where in the world does that scene go? And I probably wouldn't actually bet, I wouldn't like put their soul on the line for like a performance check. I'd probably make it so it's an imp who actually doesn't have that kind of contractual power in hell to bind souls through these types of challenges. But for a second there, a bard might think that they're in a battle for their very soul with a demon. Or hell, you could bind their soul in a contract to this imp, and then what does the imp do with that? That would probably have some further reaching implications than I like to have with my small events, but if you want to go that direction, feel free, let me know how it goes in the comments, let me know how much your bard hates you. And how do these events play in with racial features as well? So maybe there's a maligned race, a drow, and they get a letter, like an anonymous letter, and it says it's from another drow. And what they find is that it's like a meeting. It's like an AA meeting, except for drow who are just oppressed by overland society who don't accept them and think that they're all evil. And maybe there's some interesting allies that they can find at these meetings. And maybe the character doesn't want to go to a meeting like that. Maybe they don't care that people hate them because they're a drow, because of their race. Or maybe it's a great outlet for them and they meet some cool people and they get to talk about their personality and character traits, and that's a nice little RP scene for them. And it doesn't necessarily play into the larger plot, but it could give them something fun to do. Maybe they're trying to take the heroic path, doing the Dritz thing where they try to win over the hearts and minds of people that live on the surface. So some of these ideas might be ones that I've made up on my own. Some of them might be from materials that I've downloaded. After a while, it gets hard to remember, to be perfectly honest, but I like things like this that play to a specific character type and can be these small events. And you can include these if you put half a dozen on them on a random table. You can roll these up. Weather is another interesting one. We talked a little bit about this in our events and encounter tables, but if you just want a separate chart for the weather, then you absolutely can do this. So especially if you're going to be somewhere where the weather is changing frequently, say it's a campaign at sea, I would absolutely have a random chart for what's going on with the weather, what's going on with the waters underneath, and what does that say about the challenges the players have to face. Another big one is names. So I always have a list of names that are randomized. Sometimes I'll roll for them. Oftentimes I'll just have a pre-selected list. I think this falls into the same rough category as random tables, even though it might not be truly random. I'm picking them out beforehand and then just plucking a name from that list and saying, oh, this NPC that I didn't expect to have to roleplay as, here's his or her name. I find this also works really well with taverns and shops and inns. And even depending on where you are or what your world is like, you could use this with towns. If there are towns and hovels and small villages that don't necessarily have names to them established, you could just have a random chart. So if your players go somewhere you're not expecting, you roll it up and you say, oh, this is Pleasant Townvillesville. So I have actually used this on a number of occasions with things like taverns, things like shops. I used it for a ship one time at sea. I think I may have pulled that from my tavern names, but it was one that I also thought would work for a ship because I didn't expect them to board passage on a sea ship, and they did. So they needed to know the captain's name and they needed to know the boat's name because, of course, why not? So thank goodness I had these charts ready to go. And again, if you want to roll for them, great. Have a little bit of element of surprise. And if not, I think it falls into the same rough category of just having like lists of things that you can pull randomly from. And if you're looking for good resources to this effect for a lot of these different things, I think one of the best books that Wizards has come out with in 5th edition is Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Specifically for maybe not best books period, although I really enjoy a lot of the things in the book, but one of the best books for random tables. So Xanathar's, I think, has one of the more complete listings of random encounters for pretty much any terrain type. So it'll have all the different terrain types that you might encounter in a typical campaign, and then it'll break it up into tiers of play. So it'll be like level 1 to 5 in this particular terrain, and then levels 6 to 10, etc. And so you have a lot to work with there. There are a lot of character options. So they have a lot of randomized character options for, say, how did I become a paladin? Or why did I become a barbarian? And you can use it for inspiration, and you can just take the one that feels the best to you. Or you could roll randomly for it and surprise yourself. They also have a lot of minor random charts that I think are interesting tools for DMs that are related to different skills. So it's things like complications during training, or if you're selling a magic item, what problems might you run into? These aren't things that DMs normally think about. It's either, oh, there's somewhere to sell this, or there isn't. We don't necessarily think of complications related to selling a magic item, but maybe this would be something interesting for you. And maybe it wouldn't, but if this particular chart is one that you don't want to use, maybe there are others that you do. They also have some comprehensive magic item charts and name charts, and there are name generators you can find online that are specific to different classes or races or game systems. But I think the Xanathar's one is a really nice primer. There are more names than you're ever going to need, both for NPCs or players, depending on what your role is at the table. And one of the other interesting things that it does in Xanathars is there's a whole section called This Is Your Life, where you can create an entire character, an entire life story randomly. And I think a lot of players hear this and they say, why in the world would I do that? I want to do my special idea when I play a character at the table. I don't want to roll it up randomly, have it be arbitrary and something that is less than ideal for me. And this is perfectly valid, but I think that there are some sneaky good uses of the different charts in that This Is Your Life area of Xanathars. And I think that if you mine it for different events that may have happened in your life, or complications or setbacks or hardships or tragedies that you endured, it can really stimulate your creativity so that what you make, the idea that you have, you can give a little bit more depth to. And for something like a one-shot where I'm going to be playing a character and then probably will never come back to them again, I would absolutely roll up a character completely randomly because I would love to see what I come up with. So I've got it open here right beneath the camera's view, and I'm just going to look in here. So this is the D12 that you roll to see what weird stuff happened to you. And you served a powerful adventurer as a hireling. You have only recently left that service. Use the supplemental tables and work with your DM to determine the basic details about your former employer. Okay, so there's a really interesting NPC ally and not a bad backstory. Number 7, you went insane for 1d6 years and recently regained your sanity. A tic or some other bit of odd behavior might linger. That sounds awesome. Like, why did you go insane? What happened? What was it like during that time? What is the odd behavior that you now have? That is a wonderful role-playing opportunity right there. A lover of yours was secretly a silver dragon. I might just use that one. I don't know. I kind of like it. Silver is the sexiest color of dragon. I probably shouldn't say that on the internet, should I? Okay. No. But you get the point. Not all of them are that crazy or weird. That is specifically the weird stuff table that you roll on. But there are a lot of cool ideas, and if you only take one or two from the entirety of it, and then the rest of it is yours, you're still going to be adding some nuance to your character from this creative stuff that somebody else came up with. So as a player, I think that random tables can be really cool to help with character generation. For your flaws, for your ideals, for your bonds, for your backstory, for things like we just talked about, the weird stuff that happened to you during your character's life. I'd even be okay with rolling randomly for a name. I don't really feel attached to any one name. Usually I only become attached to a name after I've been playing as a character for a while, and the name is something more than an abstract thing. It's an actual person that I've been inhabiting and playing for a long period of time. So at the very beginning, I'm sort of name agnostic. You know, half the time when I play, I'm gender agnostic. I go to the table and I'm not really sure whether or not this character is male or female. And a lot of times I'm like, well, let's see. This feels a little bit more like this to me. That makes more sense in my mind. But a random table is a great way to determine some of those things. You know, what is your race? What is your name? What is your backstory? You know, which of your parents are dead? Are they both alive? What did they do? You know, stuff like that. I don't necessarily need to establish each one of those, but if I do establish them, it might be cool to pull it randomly from something else. So what other resources are out there for random tables? Well, if you look for random anything, just random, and then insert whatever it is you're looking for, you can probably find generators for it online. In our video on resources for both players and DMs, I talked about Donjon RPG Tools. That's a good website that has a number of random generators. I use that for loot occasionally, or ideas for loot piles. I think it can be good for that. I don't necessarily use randomized loot too often, but I use randomized generators to come up with ideas quite often. I've also used name generators online. There are a bunch of them. Many of them are really cool. Many of them have very weird permutations on naming conventions. So if you're looking for something that's really out there and you either want to find a name or you just want to find some inspiration, those can be great. And the other thing that I would recommend is if you want to start building your own, especially when it comes to, say, things that exist in the real world, like weather or random events, it doesn't need to be fantasy. It doesn't need to be magical. just live your life for a number of weeks and start to take note of the different weather patterns and how you might forget about it a day later unless you really take note of it, but it is subtly different than it was a day before, even if there are some similarities. It'll give you some nuance to describe it when you're creating a big random table and you want some variation, but some of them are necessarily going to be somewhat similar. Same with random events that happen to you. What happens that you didn't plan in a given month? Write down 3 or 4 of those that could translate well into an RPG world, and those might become 3 or 4 numbers on a d20 random table for events that happen to your players. And it might just be random little stuff as they're walking around a town. It doesn't have to be anything big, but it will add an element of realism, of authenticity to your game. So I was going to do an outro, like the intro, where I rolled randomly from tables in Xanathars to like randomize it. And I was going to do one from the crime table that happens in a character's backstory. So I was going to say, tell me your best blank stories. And I rolled murder. And I'm not sure I should be telling people to like admit to murder down in the comments of my video. So we're not going to do that. But I'm going to check to see if there are other tables I can use. So give me a second. There's so many that would make terrible outros. The childhood memories one, I'm looking at that. It's like, so, down in the comments, tell me about how you spent most of your childhood alone with no close friends. So down in the comments, let me know how society's decadence disgusts you. Alright, so down in the comments, let me know why your lover disappeared without a trace and how you've been looking for that person ever since. If that really did happen to you, please actually let me know about it. I really want to hear your story. Nope, I got it. Here we go. All right, so down in the comments, tell me about how a powerful being granted you a wish, but you squandered it on something frivolous. So you have acquired a wish from a powerful benevolent deity, but you did something real dumb with it. What was that thing? Let me know that down in the comments, and I would love to hear it.